When his stepmother kicked him out at 18 with what she called a worthless inheritance, she thought she was saddling him with a pile of rust and debt. She had no idea she was handing him the key to a family fortune and a fight for justice that would change everything. I turned 18 in a room that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. For 2 years, since my father's funeral, I'd been a ward of the state, a file in a cabinet, a number on a spreadsheet. On my birthday, they didn't give me a cake. They gave me a cardboard box containing a few worn-out clothes, a faded photo of my dad and me, and a manila envelope. They called it aging out. It felt more like being pushed off a cliff. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing but the clothes on your back and a past you were trying to outrun, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because we're going to talk about what it really means to build a life from the ground up. My social worker, a tired woman named Ms. Albright, whose smiles never quite reached her eyes, drove me to a small, sterile office downtown. She said my stepmother, Cynthia, had requested a final meeting, a legal formality. Cynthia and I hadn't spoken since the day she signed the papers that put me into the system. She had looked at me with a cold, glassy expression I couldn't decipher, her grief for my father twisted into something sharp and pointed at me. I sat on a plastic chair that stuck to my jeans, the air conditioning humming a flat, monotonous tune. Cynthia walked in 10 minutes late, looking exactly the same. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes expensive and severe. She didn't look at me, not at first. She addressed the lawyer at the table, a man named Peterson, who seemed just as eager for this to be over as I was. "Is this all necessary?" she asked, her voice clipped. "Can't we just sign the papers?" Peterson cleared his throat. "Mr. Vance, your father's will had a specific provision for you upon your 18th birthday. Your stepmother, as the executor, is here to finalize that bequest." He slid a document across the polished table. Cynthia finally glanced at me. There was no warmth, no recognition. Just a flicker of annoyance, like I was a piece of unfinished business. "Your father," she began, the words sounding like stones in her mouth, "left you his father's old business, the iron shop. It's up in Northwood." I stared at her. The iron shop. I had vague, dreamlike memories of it from when I was very young. The smell of hot metal and coal smoke. The deep, booming laugh of my grandfather, a man with hands as rough as gravel and a heart as big as the sky. He'd passed away when I was 7. My dad had never been able to bring himself to sell the place, even though it had been closed for years. It just sat there, a monument to a man we both missed. "It's worthless," Cynthia continued, her voice flat, matter-of-fact. "The property taxes are overdue. The building is practically condemned. I was advised to let the county seize it, but the will was explicit. It's yours now. The debt, the decay, all of it." She slid a large, rusty key across the table. It landed with a dull thud next to the legal papers. "There's a bus ticket in the envelope. One way. I suggest you go up there, sell it for scrap if you can get anyone to bite, and consider it the last thing you will ever get from this family." The finality in her voice was absolute. This wasn't just a legal transaction, it was an act of severance. She was cutting the last thread that connected me to my father, to my past. She was banishing me to a forgotten town with a worthless inheritance. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and took the key. It was heavy, cold, and real. It felt like the only solid thing in a world that had become flimsy and uncertain. I picked up the envelope with the bus ticket. I didn't look at the lawyer. I didn't look at her. I just stood up, the legs of the chair scraping against the linoleum floor. As I walked to the door, her voice stopped me one last time. "Leo," she said. I paused, my back to her. "Maybe a flicker of something? A last-minute change of heart? Don't try to contact me again. This is a clean break." There it was, the clean break. I walked out of that office and didn't look back. The city air felt thick and suffocating. The box in my hands felt impossibly heavy, not with things, but with the absence of them. I had a key to a pile of rust, a one-way ticket to a town I barely remembered, and the chilling finality of my stepmother's words. She thought she was sending me to my end. She had no idea she was sending me to my beginning. The bus station was a purgatory of flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. People drifted through like ghosts, their faces etched with the exhaustion of travel, of running from something or toward something else. I felt like one of them. My entire life was in a single cardboard box at my feet, and my future was a bus ticket to a place called Northwood. I found my gate and sat down, the plastic seat cold against my legs. I pulled out the envelope Cynthia had given me. Inside was the bus ticket, a $100 bill, and a folded piece of paper. It was a tax delinquency notice from the county. The amount was staggering, thousands of dollars. Cynthia wasn't exaggerating. The property was on the verge of being seized. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. What was I supposed to do? I was 18 years old, with $100 and a mountain of debt attached to a building I hadn't seen in over a decade. The whole thing felt like a cruel joke, a final, parting shot from a woman who clearly despised me. I leaned my head back against the wall, the institutional grime of the station feeling strangely familiar after 2 years in foster care. I closed my eyes and tried to remember my grandfather, to remember the shop. The memories were faint, like old photographs bleached by the sun. I could remember the sound of his hammer on the anvil, a rhythmic, ringing beat that felt like the town's own heartbeat. I remembered the sparks, a shower of tiny orange stars in the dusty air. And his voice, a low rumble that made me feel safe. He used to call me his little spark. "You've got the fire in you, Leo," he'd say, ruffling my hair with a calloused hand that smelled of steel and oil. "Don't ever let anyone put it out." The memory was so clear, so potent, that it brought a lump to my throat. I hadn't thought of that in years. The system has a way of making you forget who you were, of sanding down your edges until you fit into their boxes. For 2 years, I hadn't been a spark, I'd been a case file. The bus ride was long and quiet. I watched the city skyline shrink in the window until it was just a smudge on the horizon, replaced by an endless stretch of highway, then rolling hills and dense forests. The landscape grew greener, wilder. The air coming through the cracked window sill started to smell of pine and damp earth instead of exhaust fumes. It was the smell of my childhood summers, of fishing trips with my dad and grandfather. With every mile, I felt like I was traveling not just through space, but through time, back toward a part of myself I thought was gone forever. The bus wheezed into Northwood just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The town was smaller than I remembered. A single main street with a handful of storefronts, a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. I stepped off the bus, my box in my arms, and stood on the cracked pavement. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the big oak tree in the town square. For a moment, I was completely lost. Then I saw it. At the far end of the street, set back from the road, was a large, dark building with a sagging roof. The sign above the massive double doors was so faded and rusted you could barely make out the words. Vance and Son Ironworks. It looked less like a building and more like a tombstone. My inheritance, my pile of rust. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing in the evening quiet. The closer I got, the more dilapidated it looked. The windows were boarded up, the paint was peeling in long strips, and weeds grew thick and tangled around the foundation. A large red notice was nailed to the door. Notice of tax foreclosure. My heart sank. Cynthia hadn't just been cruel, she'd been precise. She'd given me a dying thing and just enough time to watch it take its last breath. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. The weight of the key in my pocket felt immense. This was it, the end of the line. Or was it? I thought of my grandfather's voice. Don't ever let anyone put it out. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of rust and rain, the same way my memories of him did. I walked up the crumbling concrete steps, pulled the heavy iron key from my pocket, and pushed it into the lock. The lock was stiff from years of disuse. I had to put my whole body into it, grunting with effort as I turned the key. It resisted, groaned, and then finally gave way with a loud, metallic clank that echoed like a gunshot in the silent street. The heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing a wall of absolute darkness. A wave of cold, musty air washed over me, a smell of dust, decay, and something else. Something metallic and ancient. The smell of the forge. The smell of my grandfather. I hesitated for a moment on the threshold, a strange mix of fear and an even stranger sense of homecoming washing over me. This place was a ruin. It was a burden. It was a trap. But it was also mine. I took a step inside, leaving the world of foster homes and sterile offices behind, and entered the darkness. The door swung shut behind me, plunging me into a thick, velvety blackness. The click of the latch was deafening. I stood perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes slowly adjusted, and faint shapes began to emerge from the gloom. Moonlight filtered through the grimy, boarded-up windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the vast space. The main room was cavernous. A massive forge and anvil stood in the center like a sacrificial altar. Tools hung on the walls, ghostly silhouettes coated in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. Workbenches were littered with half-finished projects, frozen in time. It was as if my grandfather had just walked out one day and never come back. I set my box down, the sound muffled by the dust on the floor. I ran my hand along a cold workbench, my fingers leaving a clean streak in the grime. Underneath, the wood was solid oak, scarred and stained from decades of work. I could almost feel the vibrations of past projects, the energy of creation that once filled this space. I felt like an archaeologist entering a newly discovered tomb. Every object was an artifact, a piece of a life I barely knew. I found a heavy canvas tarp covering a large object in the corner. I pulled it back, and a cloud of dust billowed into the air, making me cough. Underneath was my grandfather's old pickup truck, a vintage Ford, its once bright red paint now faded to a dull, rusty orange. It was beautiful, a ghost of a machine. My dad used to tell me stories about this truck, about how he and my grandfather had rebuilt the engine together. It was another piece of the past, sitting here waiting. At the back of the main workshop, there was a small, closed door with a grimy window. The office. I tried the handle, but it was locked. I peered through the window, wiping away a layer of filth with my sleeve. I could just make out the shape of a large wooden desk, a chair, and filing cabinets. It was the nerve center of the operation. If there were any answers here, they would be in that room. I went back to the front door and looked at the massive, complicated lock. It wasn't just a simple deadbolt. There were other mechanisms, other keyholes. My grandfather had been a man who valued security. The key Cynthia had given me had opened the main door, but it was clearly not the only one. I spent the next hour searching the main workshop for another key. I checked under benches, in the drawers of tool chests, on the hooks where he hung his work aprons. Nothing. Just more dust, more rust, more silence. Exhausted and frustrated, I slumped down on an old wooden stool, the weight of my situation pressing down on me. I was in a dark, cold, locked-up building in the middle of a town where I knew no one. I had $100 that had to last me God knows how long, and a foreclosure notice that felt like a ticking time bomb. It was hopeless. I buried my face in my hands. The smell of dust and cold metal filled my senses. I felt a wave of grief so profound it almost buckled me. Grief for my grandfather, for my father, for the life I'd lost. I cried, not loud, sobbing cries, but silent, hot tears that tracked through the grime on my face. I cried for the little boy who had lost his hero, for the teenager who had lost his father, and for the young man who was now completely and utterly alone. After a while, the tears stopped. I was left with a hollow, aching emptiness. I lifted my head and looked around the dark workshop again. It wasn't just a building. It was the last piece of them I had left. Selling it for scrap, letting the county take it, it felt like a betrayal. It felt like letting them die all over again. A new feeling started to bubble up through the grief and despair. Anger. A cold, quiet anger at Cynthia for her cruelty, at the system for its indifference, and at the world for its unfairness. And then, a flicker of something else. Determination. My grandfather's words came back to me, clear as a bell in the silence. You've got the fire in you, Leo. Don't ever let anyone put it out. I stood up. I wasn't going to let this place die. I wasn't going to let them win. I had to get into that office. I started thinking like my grandfather would have. He was a blacksmith, a metal worker, but he was also an inventor, a puzzle maker. My dad said he loved creating things with hidden compartments and clever mechanisms. The lock on the office door wasn't just a lock, it was a test. I went back to the anvil, that huge block of solid steel in the center of the room. It was the heart of the shop. I ran my hands over its smooth, worn surface. And then I saw it. On the side of the anvil's massive wooden base, almost invisible in the dim light, was a small, intricate carving. It wasn't just decoration. It was a pattern, a series of symbols. A star, a gear, a hammer. I recognized them. They were from a story my grandfather used to tell me, a little fairy tale he'd made up about a blacksmith who forged the stars. I touched the star. Nothing happened. I touched the hammer. Nothing. I traced the gear. Then I remembered the sequence from the story. The blacksmith used his hammer to shape the gear that would turn the heavens and release the stars. Hammer, gear, star. I pressed the symbols in that order. There was a soft, mechanical click from inside the wooden base. A small, perfectly fitted panel popped open. My breath caught in my throat. Inside the hidden compartment was not a key, but a single, heavy, ornate piece of forged iron. It was a lever, shaped like a dragon's head. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, what this was for. I took the lever back to the main door. To the left of the big lock was a small, almost invisible slot in the iron-strapped door frame. It was a perfect match for the lever. I slid the lever in. It fit like it was made for it, because it was. I pulled down. Deep within the wall, a series of heavy tumblers and gears shifted with a low, grinding groan. It was the sound of a machine waking from a long slumber. Then, from across the room, I heard another sound. A loud, definitive click. The lock on the office door. It was open. I walked toward the office, my heart pounding a rhythm that matched the memory of my grandfather's hammer. The door swung open easily now, not a creak from its hinges. The air inside was even more still, more heavy with the weight of time. The moonlight cut through the grimy window, illuminating the massive oak desk that dominated the room. And on the center of the desk, placed squarely in the middle as if waiting for me, was a thick, leather-bound journal. Beside it lay a sealed envelope, with a single word written on it in my grandfather's familiar, strong script. Leo. My name. I sat down in the old leather chair. It sighed under my weight, the leather cracking in protest. For a moment, I just sat there, in the dark, in the quiet, a ghost in my grandfather's chair. This was it. This was the real inheritance. Not the rust, not the debt. This. The story. The truth. I picked up the envelope. My hands were trembling. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was thick and expensive. The ink was a deep, dark blue. The words were a lifeline thrown across the years. "My dearest Leo," it began, "my little spark. If you are reading this, then I am long gone, and the world has not been as kind to you or your father as I would have wished. I am sorry for that, more sorry than you can ever know. I hope you have found the way in. I always knew you were clever. You have my mind, just as your father had my heart. This room, this shop, it is not what it seems." Cynthia was right in one respect. As an ironworks, it is worthless. Its value lies elsewhere. I need you to listen, my boy, and I need you to be strong. What I am about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but you must. I stopped reading, my own heart aching. His voice was so clear in my head as I read the words. It was as if he were sitting right there beside me. The warmth, the low rumble, the underlying strength. It was almost too much to bear. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. This shop was my life's work, but not in the way people thought. After your grandmother passed, I turned my skills to a different kind of work. I became a different kind of blacksmith, not of iron, but of information. Your father knew some of it, but I shielded him from the worst. It was a burden I did not want him to carry. But now, it seems, that burden has fallen to you. The debt on this property is real, but it is also a weapon being used against us. The foreclosure notice is not just a legal matter, it is a threat. A chill went down my spine. A threat? Who would be threatening a defunct iron shop? Years ago, the letter went on, a powerful development corporation, Trident Development, came to Northwood. They wanted to buy up the whole valley, dam the river, and build luxury resorts. They promised jobs and prosperity, but their methods were ruthless. They pushed people out, ruined businesses, and broke anyone who stood in their way. I stood in their way. I knew the dam would destroy the ecosystem, poison the water table. I had the geological surveys to prove it. I fought them. And I paid the price. The letter described a campaign of harassment, vandalism at the shop, threats, financial pressure. They tried to ruin him, to force him to sell. But he refused. He used his skills to fight back. I built things, Leo. Not just gates and railings. I built safes, hidden compartments, secure storage for people who needed to protect things, journalists, whistleblowers, people running from powerful enemies. This shop became a sanctuary, a vault. The money I made wasn't from decorative ironwork. It was from protecting secrets. And the biggest secret I ever protected is hidden right here, in this office. I looked around the dark room, at the filing cabinets, the bookshelves, the heavy desk. It was all a facade, a stage set for a play I was only just beginning to understand. Trident Development never got the valley, the letter concluded. But they never forgave me. They are a patient, vindictive enemy. They are the ones behind the tax liens. They have been waiting for me to die, waiting for the property to fall into their hands, so they can finally bury what's hidden here. Your stepmother, Cynthia. I don't know if she is a willing participant or just a pawn, but her actions serve their purpose. They want you to fail. They want you to walk away. They expect you to sell this place for scrap and disappear. You must not. The letter ended with a final, chilling instruction. The journal on the desk is the key to everything. It is a record of every secret I ever kept. But the most important one, the one that can stop Trident for good, is not in the journal. It is the journal. Read it. Understand it. And then you will have a choice to make. A choice between running for the rest of your life or fighting for the soul of this valley. The choice is yours, my boy. I know you will make the right one. Your grandfather, Thomas Vance. I put the letter down, my hand shaking so badly the paper rattled against the wood of the desk. My mind was reeling. Trident development, a secret war, a shop that was actually a vault. It was insane. It was the plot of a movie, not my life. And yet, it explained so much. The strange lock mechanism, my grandfather's obsession with security, Cynthia's cold, calculated dismissal of me, sending me here with just enough rope to hang myself. She wasn't just being cruel, she was being tactical. She, or the people she was working for, wanted this property. They wanted it badly. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a strange clarity cutting through my fear and confusion. I was in danger. Real, tangible danger. But I also had something I hadn't had an hour ago. A purpose. My grandfather hadn't left me a pile of rust. He had left me a weapon. And a choice. I looked at the leather-bound journal. It was heavy in my hands. The cover was worn smooth from years of use. I opened it to the first page. It was filled with my grandfather's dense, elegant script, detailing dates, names, and transactions. But it was also filled with complex schematics, chemical formulas, and intricate drawings of mechanical devices. It wasn't just a ledger. It was a master craftsman's grimoire. I felt a profound sense of awe. This was his real legacy. This was his mind, his soul, committed to paper. I sat there in the dark, the moonlight my only lamp, and I began to read. I read for hours, my world shrinking to the pages of that journal. It was a history of quiet rebellion. My grandfather had built hidden compartments in the cars of political dissidents, created untraceable containers for sensitive documents, and designed safes that were masterpieces of mechanical engineering. He was a ghost, a legend in a world I never knew existed. His clients were a secret network of people fighting against corruption, corporate greed, and injustice. He was their locksmith, their armorer, and Trident development was his arch nemesis. The journal detailed his long war with them. He had collected evidence of their crimes, bribery, environmental violations, blackmail. He had sworn affidavits from people they had ruined. He had soil and water samples proving their projects were ecological disasters waiting to happen. He had everything needed to expose them and bring them down. He had hidden it all, and the journal was the map. The entries were cryptic, filled with codes and allusions to his blacksmithing craft. The heart of the dragon lies beneath the cold forge. The fire safe requires 2 keys, one of iron, one of memory. It was a puzzle, a series of riddles only a blacksmith, or a blacksmith's grandson, could solve. I felt a pit in my stomach. I wasn't a blacksmith. I didn't know the first thing about this craft. How could I possibly solve these puzzles? It was an impossible task. He had overestimated me. I closed the journal, the weight of it all crashing down on me. The fear returned, colder and sharper this time. I was just a kid. I'd spent the last 2 years learning how to be invisible, how to not make waves. He was asking me to take on a multi-million-dollar corporation. They had crushed him, a man of iron will and brilliant intellect. What chance did I have? I felt a wave of panic. I should just leave. Take the $100, get on a bus, and disappear. I could change my name, start over somewhere else. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. I stood up and paced the small office, my shadow dancing on the walls. I felt trapped. Trapped by the legacy, by the danger, by the building itself. And in that moment, sitting on that dusty floor, with my grandfather's life laid out before me in a language I couldn't fully understand, I just broke. It was a complete and utter collapse. The anger, the grief, the terror, it all came pouring out. I wasn't strong. I wasn't clever. I was a scared kid who had been handed a war he didn't know how to fight. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the truth is so big, it just shatters everything you thought you knew about yourself, about your family, about the world? It feels like you're drowning, and you can't even see the surface. If you have, I want you to know you're not alone in that feeling. Let me know in the comments what that moment was for you, because sharing these stories is how we find our strength. I read every single one. That feeling, that rock bottom, it's not the end. Sometimes, it's the place you have to get to before you can start building. Now, back to the story. I had to decide what to do next. For what felt like an hour, I just sat there, hollowed out. The fight had gone out of me. I was ready to run. I was going to walk out that door, leave the key on the desk, and never look back. I picked up my box, my only worldly possessions. As I did, the faded photo of my dad and me slipped out and landed face up on the floor. It was from a camping trip, just after my 7th birthday. My dad was kneeling beside me, his arm around my shoulders. We were both grinning, holding up a string of fish we had just caught. Behind us, my grandfather was standing by his old red truck, watching us with a proud, loving smile. His face was so clear in the photo. The strength in his eyes, the kindness in his expression. He wasn't just a brilliant engineer or a secret warrior. He was my grandpa. He was the man who taught me how to skip stones, who told me stories about forging stars, who made me feel safe. And my dad. My dad had been so happy that day. He'd inherited his father's heart, the letter had said. A good, kind heart. And Trident had squeezed that heart until it broke. My father's death hadn't been a simple accident, as I'd been told. It had been a workplace incident at a construction company, a subsidiary of Trident Development. The connection clicked into place with sickening certainty. They hadn't just harassed my grandfather. They had come after his son. They had taken my father from me. The grief and fear inside me began to burn. It transmuted into something else. A cold, hard rage. This wasn't just about a valley or about justice for strangers anymore. This was personal. They had taken everything from me. My grandfather, my father, my childhood, my home. Running wasn't an option anymore. Running would mean they had won. It would mean their actions had no consequences. It would mean my father's life, my grandfather's fight, meant nothing. I picked up the photograph and carefully placed it on the desk, next to the journal. Then I picked up the journal again. This time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a sword. I wasn't my grandfather. I didn't have his skills or his knowledge. But I had his name. I had his blood. And I had the fire he'd seen in me. I was his little spark. And I was about to start a blaze. My choice was made. I wasn't running. I was staying. I was fighting. I spent the rest of the night and into the dawn poring over the journal, a pen and a pad of paper I found in a desk drawer, my only tools. I started cross-referencing the cryptic entries with the schematics. The heart of the dragon lies beneath the cold forge. I went out to the main workshop and stared at the massive brick forge. It was cold, yes, but the heart? I thought about the dragon lever. That had been the first key. Maybe this was related. I ran my hands over the bricks, looking for a loose one, a hidden switch. Nothing. I was about to give up when I remembered another detail from the stories my grandfather used to tell. The dragon in his tales always guarded its treasure with its breath. Fire. I looked at the forge again. Where does the fire come from? The bellows. I found the huge leather and wood bellows tucked away to the side. It was ancient and stiff. I put all my weight on the handle, pushing down. A wheezing gasp of dusty air came out. I pushed again and again, creating a rhythm. On the 10th push, I heard it. Not from the bellows, but from beneath the forge itself. A deep, resonant thud. A heavy bolt sliding home. Or rather, sliding open. I got down on my hands and knees and looked under the forge. A section of the stone floor that had been perfectly seamless before now had a tiny gap around it. A trap door. It was too heavy to lift. I looked back at the bellows. Attached to the handle was a long iron chain that disappeared into the wall. I followed it. It led to a series of gears and counterweights hidden in the rafters. My grandfather hadn't just built a forge, he'd built a machine. I went back to the bellows and gave one more mighty heave. The gears in the ceiling turned, the counterweights shifted, and with a low groan, the stone slab that was the trapdoor slowly rose on its own, revealing a dark, square opening. The air that rose from the opening was cold and dry. It smelled of stone and old paper. I found an old flashlight in a drawer. Miraculously, it still worked, casting a weak, yellowish beam. I pointed it down into the darkness. A steep set of stone steps led down into a small, brick-lined cellar. And in the center of the cellar was a safe. It wasn't just a safe. It was a work of art. A massive, ironclad behemoth covered in the same kind of intricate carvings as the anvil base. This was the fire safe from the journal. And it was going to take more than a simple combination to open. The entry for the fire safe was the most cryptic of all. It requires 2 keys, one of iron, one of memory. I already had a collection of strange iron keys and levers. I tried them all. None of them fit the single, star-shaped keyhole on the safe's door. The key of iron was missing. And what about the key of memory? I sat on the cold stone steps, the flashlight beam dancing on the intricate metalwork of the safe. A key of memory. What could that possibly mean? A password? A date? I thought about my grandfather, about the stories he told me. The memories were all I had left. I thought about the star-forging blacksmith, the anvil carving, the dragon lever. Everything was connected to his stories, to my childhood. The key of memory wasn't a piece of information. It was a memory itself. My flashlight beam caught something on the wall of the cellar. A small, framed photograph. It was a picture of my grandmother, a woman I'd never met. She was beautiful, with a kind smile. My grandfather had loved her deeply. My dad said he was never the same after she died. Tucked into the corner of the frame was a small pressed flower, a forget-me-not, one of memory. Was it this simple, or this complicated? The journal had another clue I'd overlooked, a small drawing next to the fire-safe entry. It was a sequence of 5 notes on a musical staff. I didn't know how to read music. I was stuck again. I spent another day searching the office. I was starting to feel the pressure. My $100 was dwindling fast after a trip to the town's small grocery store for bread and peanut butter. The foreclosure notice on the door felt like it was mocking me. Time was running out. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath a stack of old invoices, I found a small, carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a silver music box. It was exquisite. The lid was engraved with the image of a star, my grandfather's symbol. I wound it up. A delicate, haunting melody filled the silent office. It was a tune I recognized, but I couldn't place it. A lullaby? I looked back at the journal, at the 5 notes drawn on the page. The music box was playing those same 5 notes over and over. And then I remembered. It was the lullaby my father used to hum to me when I was a child. A song his own father had taught him. A song my grandfather had written for his wife, my grandmother. A key of memory. I looked at the front of the safe again. There were 5 small, unmarked buttons arranged in a circle around the keyhole. I pressed them in the sequence of the notes from the lullaby. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A soft click. And from a hidden slot right below the keyhole, a small, star-shaped iron key slid out. The key of iron. My hands were shaking. I had both keys, the one forged from steel and the one forged from love and loss. I slid the iron key into the star-shaped lock. It turned smoothly. I pulled on the massive handle. The door was incredibly heavy, but it swung open without a sound, a testament to my grandfather's craftsmanship. The inside of the safe was lined with dozens of small, sealed metal boxes. Each was labeled with a date and a code. This was it, the evidence, the ammunition, the truth. One box was larger than the rest. It wasn't labeled with a code, but with a name. For Leo. I lifted it out. It was heavy. I carried it upstairs to the office and set it on the desk. My heart was pounding. What could he have left for me specifically? I pried open the sealed lid. It wasn't full of documents. It was full of cash. Stacks and stacks of neatly bundled $100 bills. I counted a small portion of it. It was an astronomical amount of money. Enough to pay off the taxes 10 times over. Enough to disappear and live comfortably for the rest of my life. There was another letter on top of the cash. Leo, if you have found this, you have proven yourself worthy of the choice. This money is your escape. You can take it, walk away, and never look back. No one would blame you. You owe this fight nothing. Build a life for yourself. Be happy. That is all I ever wanted for you and your father. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to fight, then this money is your war chest. Use it to hire the best. Use it to protect yourself. Use it to see this through to the end. The choice, as always, is yours. But know this, true wealth is not what is in this box. True wealth is building something that lasts. It is defending the people and places you love. It is honoring the sacrifices of those who came before you. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. Your grandfather. I sat there, staring at more money than I had ever seen in my life. The easy way out, the escape hatch. Everything I thought I wanted just 2 days ago. I could be on a beach somewhere in a week. This town and its ghosts, a distant memory. But I looked at the picture of my dad. I thought of my grandfather's words. I thought of the long, slow, quiet war he had fought in this very building. I thought about Trident Development, this faceless, monstrous corporation that had taken so much and was now poised to take the last thing I had left. I pushed the box of money aside. The choice was clear. It had been clear from the moment I saw my father's face in that photograph. I was staying. I was fighting. I went back to the journal and found the page I was looking for. At the very back, there was a list of names and numbers under the heading Allies. The first name on the list was Arthur Davies, Esquire, with a phone number. The description read, "An honest lawyer, a rare and valuable thing. He knows the stakes. Trust him." I used the last of my phone's battery to make the call. It rang 3 times, and then a calm, steady voice answered. "Davies." "My name is Leo Vance," I said, my own voice sounding thin and young. "My grandfather was Thomas Vance. He left me a message. He said I should call you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling. Then the voice came back, softer this time, with a note of something that sounded like weary surprise. "Thomas's grandson. I see. I've been wondering when you might call. Where are you, son?" "I'm at the shop," I said. "I'm in his office." There was another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the man thinking, assessing. "Don't touch anything else," he said finally, his voice now crisp and professional. "Don't talk to anyone. And don't leave the property. A car has been parked on your street for the last 24 hours. They know you're there. I'll be there by morning. We have a lot to talk about." He hung up. I looked out the grimy office window. Sure enough, parked down the street, almost hidden in the shadows of the old oak tree, was a dark sedan. It was just sitting there, watching. The fight had already begun. The next morning, a modest, clean sedan pulled up in front of the shop. A man in his late 50s got out, He was tall and thin, with graying hair and a kind, intelligent face. He wore a simple suit that looked well-worn but respectable. This had to be Arthur Davies. I opened the door before he could knock. He looked at me, his eyes taking in my disheveled appearance, the dust on my clothes, the exhaustion on my face. He gave me a small, sad smile. "You have your grandfather's eyes," he said. It was the first thing anyone had said to me in years that made me feel seen, not as a case file, but as a person, as a Vance. I led him into the office. He looked around, his gaze lingering on the open journal, the empty safe in the cellar, the box of money on the desk. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "Thomas was a brilliant man," he said quietly, "and a stubborn one. He prepared for this, for you." We spent the next several hours talking. I told him everything, about Cynthia, about aging out of the system, about finding my way into the office and the vault. I showed him the letters, the journal, the evidence boxes. He listened patiently, his expression calm and unreadable. When I was finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Trident development is more powerful now than they were in your grandfather's day," he said, his tone pragmatic and serious. "They have deep pockets and political connections. This will not be an easy fight. They will try to discredit you. They will use the fact that you were in the system against you. They will paint you as a troubled, delinquent kid looking for a payout." "But the evidence?" I asked. "It's all here. Bribery, illegal dumping, blackmail, it's undeniable." "Evidence is only as powerful as the story you can tell with it," Davies replied. "And right now, they control the story. We need to change that." He explained the legal strategy. We wouldn't just sue them for damages. We would file for an injunction to stop their current projects, citing the environmental data my grandfather had collected. We would leak key pieces of the evidence to trusted journalists he knew. We would fight them on multiple fronts, in the courtroom, in the press, and in the court of public opinion. "This will consume your life, Leo," he warned me. "It will be long, and it will be ugly. Are you sure you're ready for that?" I looked at the photo of my dad and my grandfather. "I'm sure," I said. The money my grandfather left was the first tool. Davies helped me set up a trust, pay the back taxes on the shop with a cashier's check that couldn't be easily traced, and put the rest into a legal defense fund. The foreclosure notice came down. The shop was safe, for now. The first move was small but significant. We filed the initial lawsuit. It was a quiet declaration of war. Trident's response was swift. A lawyer from a big city firm sent me a letter offering a settlement. A generous one. Enough to make me a rich man. All I had to do was turn over everything in the shop and sign a non-disclosure agreement. It was a test. They were trying to see if I had a price. I told Davies to send back a one-word reply. No. The days that followed were a strange mix of tense waiting and hard work. While Davies and his team prepared the legal battle, I started the slow process of bringing the ironworks back to life. I wasn't just hiding out there anymore. I was living there. I cleaned. I swept away decades of dust. I organized my grandfather's tools, running my hands over the smooth, worn wood of the handles, feeling a connection to him in a way I never had before. I found his old work clothes and his leather apron. I found books on metallurgy, on blacksmithing, on engineering. I started to read them, not just to understand his puzzles, but to understand him. To understand my own legacy. The community, which had at first been wary of the strange kid living in the abandoned shop, started to warm up. The owner of the diner, a kind woman named Maria, started leaving a hot meal for me on the steps some evenings. An old man who ran the hardware store, who remembered my grandfather, stopped by and offered to help me get the power turned back on. They were small gestures, but they meant the world. They were threads tying me to this place. I was no longer an outsider. I was becoming a part of Northwood. One afternoon, I found another one of my grandfather's secrets. In a hollowed-out book on a shelf, I found a set of patents. They were for a new type of lightweight, super strong metal alloy he had developed in his final years. Davies had them appraised. They were revolutionary, worth millions. This was the real fortune, not the cash in the box, but the fruit of his genius. This was what Trident was really after. They didn't just want to bury his evidence, they wanted to steal his legacy. The fight was no longer just about the past, it was about the future. It was about protecting my grandfather's work and using it for good, not for corporate greed. The legal battle raged on for months. There were depositions, motions, endless paperwork. Trident's lawyers were slick and ruthless. They tried to paint me as an unstable grifter. But Davies was brilliant, and the evidence was undeniable. The journalists he'd contacted began publishing stories. The tide of public opinion started to turn. One day, I received a call. It was from Cynthia. Her voice was strained, panicked. "They're coming after me, Leo," she whispered. "Trident. They think I'm working with you. They're threatening me." "Why should I care?" I asked, my voice cold. "You threw me away." "I know," she said, and for the first time, I heard a crack in her perfect facade. I heard fear. "I was scared. After your father, they made it look like an accident. But I knew. They told me if I kept quiet, if I played along, they would leave me alone. They told me to get rid of you, to send you to the shop because they knew it was a dead end. I'm so sorry, Leo. I was a coward. It wasn't forgiveness she was asking for, but it was a confession. It was the truth. She was just another victim, another person broken by Trident's cruelty. I told Davies. He used her testimony to get her immunity in exchange for everything she knew. Her information was the final nail in their coffin. The fight isn't over. The lawsuits will likely go on for years. But we've won the important battles. The injunction was granted. Trident's projects are frozen. Federal investigators are now involved. The company is crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. I spend my days in the shop now. The forge is lit. I've been teaching myself the craft, using my grandfather's books and tools. The sound of a hammer on an anvil once again rings out on the main street of Northwood. It's my heartbeat. It's the town's heartbeat. I'm not just reopening an ironworks. I'm rebuilding a legacy. The patents for my grandfather's alloy are safe. We're working to license them for use in medical and green energy technologies, with the profits going into a community trust for Northwood and other small towns ravaged by corporate predators. This shop, this pile of rust, it did make me rich, but not in the way anyone would expect. It gave me a home. It gave me a purpose. It gave me back my family, not in person, but in spirit. In legacy. It taught me that true wealth isn't something you can hold in your hands. It's the strength you find in yourself, the community you build around you, and the fight you are willing to wage for what is right. What we inherit from our families isn't always money or property. Sometimes, the most valuable inheritance is a story that needs a new ending. It's a promise that needs to be kept. It's a second chance to build something that truly matters. So I want to ask you, what has your life taught you about inheritance? What's the most valuable thing, tangible or intangible, that has been passed down to you? Share your story in the comments below. Your story matters. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in fighting for what's right, even when it's hard, then please subscribe to the channel. We are a community of people who have been through the fire and are ready to build something new from the ashes. We're just getting started.